You know, right at the very heart of India's constitution, there's this incredible tension. It's this constant tug of war between your personal freedoms and the government's duty to build a fair society for everyone. And this one question has been shaping the nation for over 70 years.
So, what happens when a person's rights clash with the government's grand plans for society? Which one has to give way? To really get that, we need to meet the two main players in this whole constitutional drama. On one side, you've got fundamental rights. Think of them as your personal shield. And on the other, you have the directive principles of state policy, which are basically the nation's goals. One has real legal teeth, and the other is more of a moral compass for the government. You can probably see how this setup is just ripe for a showdown. Okay, let's zero in on that phrase, legally enforceable. Fundamental rights aren't just nice ideas. They are solid gold guarantees. If the state steps on them, you can literally take the government to court. They are the absolute bedrock of political democracy in India. Now, let's flip to the other side, the directive principles. And notice the huge difference here. They are non-enforceable. You can't sue the government for not doing them. But, and this is a big but, they are still considered fundamental in the governance of the country. They're like the Constitution's soul, always pushing for social and economic justice. And this, right here, is where our story really kicks off. Look, this relationship wasn't figured out overnight. Nope. It was hammered out in the Supreme Court through 4 absolutely landmark cases that spanned 3 decades. This timeline, this is our roadmap for figuring out how this whole constitutional tug-of-war played out. So let's jump right in at the beginning. Our story kicks off in 1951. Just a year after the Constitution was adopted. This was the first major showdown, the case of Champakam Dorairajan, and it really set the stage for everything that came after. So here's what was going down. The government of Madras rolled out a policy that reserved seats in medical and engineering colleges based on a person's caste and religion. And their reasoning, well, they said they were just following a directive principle, Article 46, which tells the state to help out weaker sections of society. Sounds like a noble goal, right? Well, it ran into a pretty big problem. And this was the court's powerful reply. The Supreme Court shot down the reservation policy. They said it violated the fundamental right to equality. The verdict was crystal clear. If there's a head-to-head conflict, fundamental rights win. Period. Directive principles have to take a backseat. A huge victory for individual rights, you might think. But Parliament wasn't about to let that be the last word. So, the court makes its ruling, but Parliament responds almost immediately. And how do they respond? By amending the Constitution itself. They added a whole new clause, Article 15(4), which basically undid the Supreme Court's judgment and legally paved the way for reservations in education. The tug of war was now officially on. All right, let's fast forward to 1967. After years of this back and forth between the courts and Parliament, the Supreme Court decided it was time to draw a line in the sand. And this next phase, it took the conflict to a whole new level. In the Goleknath case, the court didn't just say fundamental rights were supreme. They said they were transcendental and immutable. I mean, those are powerful words. It basically meant they were sacred, untouchable. The court ruled that Parliament had zero power to change or take away these rights, not even for a good cause like implementing directive principles. This created a massive constitutional gridlock. I mean, how could a country push for social reform if it couldn't even touch fundamental rights? Which brings us to 1973, and to what might be the single most important case in India's constitutional history, case of Ananda Bharati. This deadlock just couldn't last, and the court needed a way out. And what they came up with, well, it was nothing short of revolutionary. So the court introduces this brilliant idea called the Basic Structure Doctrine. It said, okay, Parliament, you can amend the Constitution. Yes, even the fundamental rights. But, and this is a huge but, you cannot destroy its core, its basic structure. And what's part of that core structure? Things like democracy, the court's power of judicial review, and, you guessed it, the balance between fundamental rights and directive principles. Honestly, the verdict in this case was just a masterclass in finding a middle ground. It allowed a couple of key economic directives, the ones aimed at stopping wealth from piling up in a few hands, to actually take priority over rights like equality, all in the name of social reform. But it shot down the government's attempt to take away the court's power to review laws. The message was clear. Social goals matter, but not if you have to tear down the whole system of checks and balances to get there. So the final chapter in this epic legal journey comes in 1980 with the Minerva Mills case. This is where the court really cemented the modern, balanced relationship we see today, and it gave us a beautiful way to think about it. To really get what's happening here, you have to remember the context. It's 1976, during the emergency, and the government passes the 42nd Amendment. This thing was a massive change that basically tried to put all directive principles above all fundamental rights. It was a clear attempt to completely flip the balance that had been so carefully worked out just a few years earlier. And the Supreme Court's response to this? Oh, it was legendary. They struck down the change, famously saying that the Constitution is built on the bedrock of the balance between rights and principles. Giving total power to one over the other, they said, would destroy the Constitution's harmony, and that harmony itself is part of the basic structure. And just like that, the final guiding principle was set in stone, the doctrine of harmonious construction. The court made it clear that fundamental rights and directive principles are not enemies in a constant tug of war. Instead, they are the two wheels of the same chariot. You can't have one without the other. They are meant to work together, in harmony, to move the nation forward. So, after that 30-year journey through the courts, where do things stand today? Because this isn't just ancient history. This balance defines the relationship between you, the citizen, and the Indian state, right now. So what does all this legal back and forth mean in the real world today? Well, you can kind of break it down like this. For a couple of very specific economic goals, like distributing the nation's resources fairly, directive principles can actually override your right to equality and certain freedoms. But for any other directive principle, your fundamental rights come first. That's the delicate balance that was achieved after decades of judicial wrestling. So why should you care about all this? Well, because this balance is everything. It's what allows the government to push for social justice, but it also puts a vital check on state power, protecting your personal freedom. And what's really amazing is how this harmony has actually helped rights to grow. I mean, take the right to education. It started as just a directive, a goal, but the courts eventually read it into the fundamental right to life, making it a legally enforceable right for millions. And that really leaves us with one big question for the future. The two wheels of the chariot have guided India through some incredible changes. But as the country faces brand new challenges, from AI and data privacy to climate change, the fundamental question is still there. Will this delicate, hard-won constitutional balance continue to light the way forward?